Hello. Good morning. We're going to be starting soon, like in about 30 seconds, because it's now 9:30. I just realized that it was time to get going. So if you could take your seats, that would be wonderful. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Patty Dykeman, one of the co-vice presidents, and we have a wonderful program today that we'll talk about in just a minute, but I'm just here to do the disclaimer that we like to do and we want to welcome all the guests that are here too. We have several guests that are here. We've got good turnout for members, so I'm glad to see you all. Just this reminder, the disclaimer, the League is a grassroots, nonprofit organization grounded in nonpartisan policy, meaning we neither support or oppose any candidate or political party at any level of government. This protects our 501c3 status. Let us be leaders in civility in the political arena. Our mission is to defend democracy and to empower voters. We continue our efforts to engage and educate voters on upcoming elections and public policy through programs like today's. While we aren't partisan, we are political. Our league has been actively involved in federal, state, and local government public policy for more than 71 years, as evidenced by our longstanding position statements. Following last month's election, we have changed our leadership, and Harry Bognich is one of our 3 leaders from the presidential team. He's going to come up and share a few words.
Hello, good morning. All right. You heard just a second ago we are not partisan, okay? We do not support any particular candidate. We do not support any political party, all right? But you notice that she said we are political. All right. So, I'm going to quote a little thing from Martha Gellhorn. She's an American novelist, writer, and journalist of the 20th century. Here's what she said. People often say with pride, "I'm not interested in politics." They might as well say, "Well, I'm not interested in my standard of living, or my health, my job, my rights, my freedoms, my future, or any future." If we mean to keep any control over our world and lives, we must be interested in politics. So, let's say, what can I do, or what can our league do? Right out here, Ann Norbury, she's got election items for sale. She's got vote buttons. Okay, maybe you need a vote button. She's got vote yard signs. In fact, there's one sitting in the back there, or whatever, but she's got yard signs. And I've got a neighbor next door, my wife Mary and I, we put out a yard sign every year in front of the elections, and we put one on one side of the yard, the front yard, and one side on the other. We want to make sure anybody driving past our house sees it. But the one year, it was kind of a little late getting it out a little bit, and my neighbor next door said, "Isn't there an election coming up?" And I said, "Yeah, there is." And he said, "Well, I didn't know about it because you didn't have your vote signs out." So, the other thing is she's got for sale out there magnetic bumper stickers that say "vote." All right, and she was talking about how she's got a white car and she put it on there and it didn't really show up very well. And her husband said, "Well, hey, just put some black, electricity type tape on there." And she said, "Oh, it pops out now," and that. So anyway, those are a couple ideas. Volunteers, we can still use volunteers for things. There's still things going on in the next few weeks, and that. So. Check on the website. We need volunteers for things. The other thing that was mentioned is, again, we're not partisan, but we're political, and our league has been involved in politics for 70-some years, okay? And it said, one of the things we've been involved is our long-standing position statements. We have positions on lots of different things, important things, health, education, etc. In fact, you may or may not know, we have 47 different position statements. And Eileen Van Bever, one of our members, she started working a couple of years ago really on bringing our position statements more up to date, getting them, more standardized, a little bit more, checking to make sure they're, still looking okay and all that. All right. So then a task force was formed by the board, okay, and Anita Kaiser, Danielle Keller, and myself, we took Eileen's work, and then we began working through it and, getting everything standardized, and Daniel's sitting back there saying, yeah, we did, and that. And so we've almost got it ready. We're going to be presenting this to the board, okay, in November, and then it will be coming out to all the members before the January meeting with the idea that we will be really voting on those position statements in March. Because it bothered me, and maybe some other people, that every year in March we said, okay, here's our position statements, yay or nay? Yay, okay, yeah, okay, they're fine, But I don't know that anybody really looked at them. Okay, well, you're going to look at them this year. Yeah, we got two big documents. Okay, one is the new handbook of position statements, and the other one is a whole thing of all the red marks and blue marks and everything that changed from that one to this one. And you're going to have to look at it, and you're going to have to read it, and you're going to be voting on it in March. Okay? So anyway, I'm not going to take any more time. I thank you very much, and we got a great program here coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. Good morning, everybody. My name is Karen. I am the other co-vice president along with Patty Dykeman. And today I have the pleasure of introducing our presenters on today's topic of special education, our children being left behind in Kansas. Back in January, we decided as a group on this timely topic. We hear a lot in the news about the education budget for the state. We hope that after this presentation, we will all have a better understanding of how the process works. Should you have any questions during the presentation, please write your question on the cards found on your chair and hold it up to be collected as the presentation is progressing. We are so fortunate to have Dr. Brent Yeager with us today. He is currently the superintendent of the Olathe School District. Dr. Yeager, would you like to say a few words about yourself and your history?
She said you didn't get a biography, so that could be dangerous.
Yeah, really. I'm letting you have the floor.
It is great to be with you all this morning. As she said, my name is Brent, and I worked with Olathe Public Schools for 18 years. Started there as an elementary principal, and then a variety of different development jobs. This is my 4th year as superintendent of the school district. I'm a Shawnee Mission kid. I grew up and went to Trailwood Elementary, Indian Middle School, Shawnee It's always fun. And then my first teaching job was briefly in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and it's one of those jobs that everybody should have because it makes you so abundantly grateful for what we have here in our education system. Moved back to the Kansas City area. My wife and I taught in Blue Valley. I taught in Blue Valley for 5 years before coming to Olathe 18 years ago. So I always like to say that I've experienced the big three as a student and an employee, and just so proud to have been part of the educational community here for most of my life. My wife is an educator. She worked in Blue Valley a lot longer than I did. Never wanted to come to Olathe because she wanted her own work identity. And she came 2 years before I became the superintendent. Like, worked out really well. So anyway, but she loves being in Olathe as well. I have 2 kids. Sam is a freshman at KU. My wife and I both went to K-State. That's where we met. Our whole lives have been there. And it comes out to go to a football game wearing a Jayhawk sweatshirt.
Support the kiddos.
Yeah, so now we're doing whatever it takes for him to live his best life. And then my daughter Grace is a 15-year-old sophomore at Lakewood West High School. So again, it's great to be with you all today. A little bit maybe about Olathe. We are the largest school district in the Kansas City metropolitan area. We're the second largest school district in the state of Kansas. Right now, we have about 29,000 students in our district, and so consequently, or through opportunity, we find ourselves in a lot of spaces to talk about special education, the importance of public education, and those kinds of things. So again, great to be with you all this morning.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yeager. Well, we do have Mare's bio, so I'm going to start out by saying that she is our moderator today. She is the Assistant Managing Editor of Race and Equity of the Kansas City Star. She was an education reporter for 20 years. Mare Rose Williams is a native of Long Island, New York, and a graduate of the Ohio University E.W. Scripps School of Journalism, and an award-winning journalist who has worked for several news organizations, including Newsday in New York and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. A year ago, she was promoted to Assistant Managing Editor for Race and Equity at the Kansas City Star, where she has worked as a news reporter, columnist, and editorial page writer for 27 years. During that time, she has won several awards for her coverage of education, both at the elementary education level and the higher education level, and as a columnist. In 2020, Mara conceived and wrote, along with 3 other reporters, the national award-winning Truth in Black and White, a 6-story project in which the Star apologized for decades of failing to fully and truthfully cover Kansas City's Black communities. She was the recipient of the Eleanor McClatchy Award for Transformative Journalism, and in 2022-2023, she won Best Column Writing by the Press Associations in Kansas and Missouri, respectively. We are looking forward to an informative discussion. Let's begin.
You should be. I just want to say that Dr. Yeager and I had not met before today, so this conversation that we're about to have, is our first, and so it's really nice to meet you. Great to be here. Before we get started with anything else, since we're going to be talking about special education, I would like for you to tell us, identify for us what is special education and how does it differ from education without the special?
Sure. Well, there was a SPED director I worked with for years who always said, not all students need special education, but all students need something special in their education. So I always love that because I think it's absolutely true. So special education is really a function of the federal government through IDEA, where students that are not able to access curriculum for one way or the other, typically at their grade level, are identified for additional supports is really what it is.
So when you talk about special education, would that also include not only those students who have some challenge, but what about the student who is excelling?
Yeah.
Is that also special education?
In the state of Kansas, it is. Most states across our nation, it is not. Gifted education or curriculum, if you will, for kids who are excelling is really done through general education. But in Kansas, we're one of only a handful of states in the nation that our gifted education is part of our special education in our state.
And well, it should be, I think.
That's right.
So these students who are in special education, how are they identified? How do you decide what child gets special education?
Yeah, great question. You know, it happens through a variety of ways. You know, the main thing I would say is it's about collaboration. So students that receive special education have normally gone through a process where either parents or classroom teachers or other educators that work with them begin to realize that there may be some challenges that that student is having that maybe can't be filled through going back and reteaching or remediation, or the word we use all the time now is through interventions. That, you know, despite our best kind of teaching techniques, instructional supports that we provide, we see a student that's still not progressing. And so then what happens is a team sits down. That team is made up of what we call the LEA. That's a person in the school that can provide resources, so can provide staff to support students, those sorts of things. Typically, it's our building principals or someone on our administrative team. Then, depending on what the need is that the student is showing, there's always special education providers there. So it generally is a resource teacher. It's generally, there's a school psychologist almost always involved. And if a student would have speech concerns, there might be a speech pathologist that would attend those meetings. And 100% of the time, the parents are included in those conversations as well. So they look at present levels of performance, so that could be classroom observation, classroom data. They look at that and they say, okay, and it kind of sometimes can go one of two ways. They can say, let's try some additional things in general education. Let's see if that makes a difference for the student. They don't wait very long. They may say, come back in 3 weeks and let's reassess where we are. Or they say, the information that's been provided is compelling and we need to move forward. And then at that time, they go through a consent to evaluate. So essentially, there's any number of evaluations that we provide. It can be anything from gross motor skills to IQ, just a number of things that we can do to evaluate where a student is presently. So the team, including the parents, sit down, they look at kind of the menu of the evaluations that are available. Everybody talks about that. Hopefully they come to consensus, and then at the end of the day, everybody on that team provides that, yes, this is the best evaluation for the student at the time, including the parents. It would never happen without parents giving consent.
When does that happen for a student? So are we talking about kindergarten? Do we wait until the child is in 3rd grade? When does that happen for a child?
Yeah, you know, one of the interesting things about special education and students qualifying for special education is there's actually no clear answer to that question. So we have a number of students in our school district, and any school district would, who are 3 and 4, who are under special education early childhood program. So they have a fairly early evaluation in their educational career. We also have students that we serve all the way to the age of 21 in our 18 to 21 programs. So, you know, I would say most typically students are identified in elementary school, but there are some things that we work through that, for dyslexia, for example, that oftentimes, certainly we try to catch kids as quickly as we can, but there are some times when they're not learning to read, but reading to learn, where things start showing they're struggling that way. So it's across the board, really.
And one more question along those lines. Once a child is identified as needing special education, does that follow them all the way through to graduation? Is it possible that a child gets special education early on and somehow they rise to the occasion, or they overcome whatever that need was and they are removed from special education? How does that work?
Yeah, it works both ways.
Okay.
So we'll see students who will be in special education for their entire school careers, and sometimes that's, again, to provide access and opportunity for kids that they do need additional support as they go through the educational system, and it may follow them all the way through. But many times the goal is to get kids out of special education. So in our district last year, we dismissed about 600 kids from special education services, which I hear a couple of you say, wow, that's good, that's good stuff. But a lot of that is really then based on the incredible work that our staff has done in collaboration with parents to fill those learning gaps wherever they may be, and get students to, the place where they can move forward without a lot of support.
And the child in special education is incorporated into the general population. I mean, they're just in the classroom getting whatever those needs whatever they need.
Yeah.
They're not separated out
Yeah.
from the general
Yeah.
population of students, right?
Yeah, generally speaking, yes. The law for us in education is that we have to place students in the least restrictive environment. So that means that students have to be as close as they possibly can be to the experience that the general education peers are receiving. So I would say that there's very few students in special education that aren't spending time with general education experiences, opportunities with their general education peers every day. We do in a district like the size of Olathe, we do have a number of students either who are so medically fragile or are going through so much social emotional distress that it's really not a great setting for them.
Right.
And so they're very, 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 rarely does that happen, but it does happen. But, I remember balance model is what I would describe. And essentially what I mean by that is students in Olathe, Shawnee Mission, Goodland, Kansas, they all have a dollar amount attached to them, if that makes sense, and that's called base state aid. So that's what funds the school district's general education budget, or our kind of just regular budget, if you will, which is one of 3 budgets that we have. So essentially what happens is we're all set at 20 mills, that's statutorily driven. So when people talk about taxes for schools, there's a little bit of it that the board has no control over, and that's 20 mills that essentially drive that base state aid. So what happens then is that money goes to Topeka, it's put in a pot, and then it's distributed evenly back around the state of Kansas. And so essentially this year, for example, every student is worth about $5,500, if that makes sense. Sounds weird to talk about students being worth $5,500. And then that's distributed out based on your enrollment. Make sense so far? And then if you have students who receive additional support or challenges. So it could be students that live in poverty, it could be students that receive English language learner support, it could be students who, I'm trying to think of other ones, who are considered at risk for any number of reasons. Then you get what they call weightings for those students. So they may say, okay, you have, like in our district, we have, I don't know, about 35% of our students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. So then those students, you get additional weightings for. So those students may be worth $7,800, something like that. And so it's distributed again in that way. And so that's what makes our general fund. And then on top of that, voters in the state of Kansas about 10 years ago had the option to vote and approve a one-time local option budget that stays forever. And so school districts have the ability to then put a tax on their local tax base for 33% of whatever the general fund is that I just described. Does that make some sense? So, and really that's to give school districts like in Johnson County the ability to provide more money for salaries and benefits because it costs more to live here than it may cost to live somewhere else. So most of our school districts in the area are maxed out on that, meaning we can't go to our local tax base and say we'd like more tax revenue to come and support that. So that makes our general fund. And that's the money that we use for our day-to-day business in school districts. And so that's paying almost all of our employees, all of our electrical bills, all of our paper needs, all those sorts of things, benefits. And that's truly our most flexible pot of money, if that makes some sense. And then outside of that, then based on your local community, you also have what's called capital outlay. So the first one's the general fund, the second one's capital outlay. And that's money that we tax locally that's designed to take care of our infrastructure. So that's things like buildings, grounds, maintenance, replacing HVAC systems. And there's a few number of people that we can pay out of that. So if somebody's connected to taking care of our HVAC, we can pay them out of our capital outlay fund. So general fund, capital outlay. And then the third one that most school districts also rely on in the state of Kansas is bond and interest. So when we build new buildings, when we have major infrastructure projects, all of our districts around here at some point in our history have gone through a period of rapid growth. So typically that goes out as a bond referendum for our communities to support our schools and our kids that way. The interesting thing about Kansas is you can't mix money between any of those things. So we're in a really interesting place sometimes. Like our district, about 3 years ago, we were in a place where we needed to trim about $23 million out of our budget. So we laid off that year about 270 people. At the same time, we were going out for a $300 million bond issue. And that was really interesting to explain because we're laying people off because our general fund is challenged, but we're also asking for a lot of money to provide new infrastructure and take care of what we have. But the challenge again is you can't move money between those three areas. And then the other one that's kind of interesting in the state of Kansas is our food service runs as a separate entity altogether. So our food service is outside of all those things. Again, a lot of us, especially as our free and reduced numbers go up, have very healthy food service programs. Oftentimes those yield fairly healthy budgets, honestly. That money has to be reinvested right back into our food service programming and can't fulfill any of these other buckets, if that makes sense. So 3 buckets, the money doesn't move between them is really the most important thing.
So what I'm hearing from you is from the general budget anyway, that money comes from the students, and that money, does that money follow the student? So wherever the student goes, like you don't keep the money, the student leaves, the money goes to the student. Is that right?
Well, you've really done your homework. Yes. So, yes. But the interesting thing is the students that are in our schools today, we won't get any payment for until next school year. So it's always at least a year behind. And so districts who are growing quickly, that's a real challenge, especially if they're not as big as some of the districts that we're used to around here.
So in other words, you can get a student, their money's already at the school in the district they left, and you're like, okay, we still got to educate this
We're
child.
still staffing that kiddo.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
we're still taking care of it. Yeah.
Also, you were talking about getting additional dollars per student depending on the need of that student. Like, you mentioned poverty or at risk. Is that also true for special education? Because I would think that it costs more to educate
So this is really going to blow your mind. So special, not really, you've studied this, maybe somebody else in the room, but special education is funded completely differently. So students who receive special education support, we get that base state aid funding, so that about $5,500 right now. But then special education is reimbursed not on the students, but on the staff that we hire, if that makes sense. So there's a reimbursement that comes back to districts for anyone that's a certified licensed special education teacher, paraprofessionals, and also transportation we provide for students with special needs.
Is any of that money, is all of that money state and local, or is any of that money federal?
About 20% of it should be federal. Notice I said the word should. The other part of it, though, is all from the state legislature as well.
So if you're,
I'd use the word should there, too.
if you're getting federal dollars, that means that the feds have some say in how you educate that child, correct?
Correct.
So, and I mean, I've talked to a lot of special education teachers, and they talk about the level of paperwork and the rigmarole they have to go through because of those federal dollars imposing all of these rules and regs on them, which then makes it harder to find special education teachers. Is that reflected then in their salary, since it is hard to find special education teachers, especially good ones?
Is reflected in their salary.
Yes, in other words, they're making more money
Well,
than.
you're going to get me in all kinds of interesting places here. That's one of the challenges in education, honestly, is the answer to that essentially is no. Most of us have a negotiated agreement that takes our professional staff and essentially places them all that way. There is some ability for school districts, depending on the district. Like in our district, we're able to give people stipends, which typically is just kind of a bonus for hard-to-fill positions that we just can't find staff for. But we're very limited in our ability as a district or as a board to differentiate that.
We talked a little bit about the federal involvement in education. What about our state legislators? What role do they play in, what role do they play in what happens in terms of funding for education, not just special education, but all of education?
Yeah, so our money for education is driven by the state legislature. So, we've been in and out of court in terms of school district against the state legislature almost since I've been in education in Kansas at different times. And so yes, it's driven completely by the state legislature, the way the money is distributed, the funding formula that's in place. And that's definitely something that we keep very close track of. Interesting, the current school finance formula is up to be talked about again in 2027. So we're getting pretty close to having those conversations again.
Okay, so if the legislature is controlling the funding, do you get involved with lobbying for additional funding as a superintendent for the largest district in Kansas? And if so, what does that look like? How much involvement do you have?
A lot. And I will tell you that our larger school districts, just because we have the staff that allows a superintendent to be involved, it's consistent across the state that way. But, last legislative session, I was probably about 10 different times in terms of being in Topeka. But outside of that, our district, and again, most large districts have a legislative liaison, aka a lobbyist, who works with us to really help the legislature understand the impacts and the realities of each of our school districts. Our Board of Education, like most, we adopt a legislative platform every fall, so that will actually be happening pretty soon for us in Olathe. That legislative platform then is really the piece that myself as a superintendent, our Board of Education members as they go out, and even others in our community that want to stick to the things that are really supported by our district. That's our foundation. The really special thing that's happened in the last number of years is all 6 Johnson County school districts, after we have our legislative platform developed, we all get together and we create a Johnson County legislative platform, because there's always things that are consistent between our districts. And each year, a number of us even go together to the State House visit with our local delegation.
Strength in numbers.
Yeah, and board members go with us, each year as well. And it's really something that has happened for a number of years in Johnson County that's really powerful.
Are we in a good place with the legislature and our funding? Or are there holes? And if there are, what are those?
What did you have for breakfast this morning? I appreciate the question very much. So the reality is, in some ways, yes, in some ways, no. One of the things that's been on our legislative priorities, and it's not different than other school districts, in terms of base state funding, those sorts of pieces that I kind of described with the weightings for kids that have other needs, we're in a decent spot there. It continues to go up every year. Obviously, the cost of us doing business as a school district goes up every year. So we're grateful that that's been fully funded as it should be. The challenge for us, though, is special education. And so, our school district, for example, last year, out of our general fund, so the flexible dollars that we have to meet the needs, we transferred $32 million out of that to our special education fund to cover our special education costs. And the thing about special education is you can't not do it. So, and that's the right thing to do by our kids, certainly. So if our special education costs go up, the number that we're supposed to receive through the statute is not being submitted to us. We make up that difference out of our general fund and cover the cost of special education. So last school year, we transferred about $32 million from our general fund to our special education to cover the cost of special education. That's significant money from our general fund that, had we not had to transfer to special education, could go to salary and benefits and things like that for all of our employees. The state legislature in the last session did make some adjustment. They added about $78 million more to special education in the state of Kansas. For Olathe, that number ended up being about $9 million. So we'll transfer probably 22 or 23, which is great. We appreciate that, but it's still funded well under the statutory requirement across the state of Kansas.
So what I'm hearing from you, maybe this is true, maybe it's not, but it sounds like special education might be a sacred cow. And I say that meaning that when there comes a time when you have to do some cutting, since you have to do special education, is that held sacred in that that is not an area you're going to be cutting? You might cut band and you might cut something else, but special education, is that sacred?
Yeah, so the best example I can give is I just talked about cutting $23 million
Yes.
from our general fund. Had we been fully funded for special education, it would have more than covered that cost. But we, by law, and again, the right thing to do for kids, when they have special education needs, we can't say, yes, we're going to take care of those, or no, we're not. The answer is yes, we are. And there's also something in law called maintenance of effort. Not to get too technical, but what that means for school districts is that the amount of money that we spent last year in special education is about the same amount of money we have to spend this year. And that's to guard against what you just said, so that school districts, as they realize that many of the supports we provide for our students with special needs are relatively expensive, we don't cut those supports.
Is that true across the state for every district?
It is.
Doesn't matter. It's
That's
not
right.
just what
Yeah,
Olathe does,
right.
it's what
And
all
actually, it's
students.
part of IDE.
Okay, that's so, yeah.
Yeah.
The federal, they
Yep.
have their hands in everything, right? They're in it. Okay, so when you're talking about school funding, and get a certain amount of money, you know what that budget's going to look like. But do certain districts have a way to bring in additional revenues outside of what's provided through taxes and feds and state funding? For example, if you're in a wealthy district, are you likely to have more dollars to work with because people are contributing? And what does that look like if that is so?
Yeah, I would say what you described is one of the reasons we have the funding formula we do in the state of Kansas, because the reality is they want the money to be equitably distributed across the state, so a kiddo in Johnson County doesn't necessarily have outweighed experiences and opportunity compared to a kid in Goodland, Kansas. The reality is, though, that still happens. I mean, all you have to do is drive around and look at different schools in different communities. But to answer your question directly, the answer is pretty much no. There are some opportunities, like all of our school districts here, we're blessed with great communities. So most of us have a foundation that works alongside of us. And so one of the things that a lot of us are using foundation dollars for, and the partnership where somebody does fundraising to support our district, are things like mental health positions and counseling support, those kinds of things that maybe we don't have the general fund dollars to do. But the best way that that can happen just for some community support is to work through our foundations typically. But they're great, we have amazing people, but you know, our annual budget's about $500 million, and you know, the foundation helps us in classrooms and does things, but there's still areas that are struggling that they can't.
So you don't consider the use of foundation dollars to be revenue for the district?
No.
Well, that's a technicality. I mean, money is money, right, and you're spending it.
Well, we don't get to spend it directly. I mean, you know, if it just went to the district office and we could say we'd like to put it towards these positions, then maybe, or whatever the case may be. But the foundations operate as a separate entity, and they have their own board of directors. So they really make decisions about where the money goes and what happens with it. We obviously all have great partnerships with our foundations, but you know, I would say, you know, one of the things we noticed in our district is, and you all know this if you have anybody in this situation, but right now it may take months and months to get in to see a psychologist or a counselor if you need something. Our foundations helped us with that by contracting with people from the outside that we then can automatically get kids to see counselors really quickly. So it's that kind of thing that we don't have the ability to do, but that's how they can support the work of the district.
So, but then there is the possibility that some districts may be able to have certain things that other districts would not have, depending on the dollars contributed to their foundation.
Sure.
And what about parent-teacher associations? Do they also, are there dollars that come to the district through them as well?
Not to the district, no.
Okay, how does that work?
So they're all also, again, they all operate as their own individual nonprofits, so they essentially have their own board. They make their own decisions about how the money is spent, where it goes.
And they suggest that to you, or can you go to them and say, we need X, Y, and Z?
It's a great question. So it's really a school-based thing that they work with the parents and the principal at the school. And so the district has very little involvement with parent organizations in schools.
So it can be school to school, and you can have several schools in one district that are getting dollars to do certain things in their school, even though another school in that same district may not have that special thing that those parents have contributed to.
Yeah, and different districts have different guidelines for how that works. So our district, for example, thank you so much. Our district, for example, there's rules that we have in place what those groups are allowed to do. So what you would see in our district is probably field trip opportunities, maybe some, you know, classroom stuff opportunities. But our district, and one of the things that we've done for a long time is there's a foundation that we have in place that's the same in every school across the district. And that's actually one of the things that really drew me to Olathe, because it didn't matter if it was a more affluent school or one of our title schools with more at-risk kiddos, if you will. What we have in our classrooms and what we experience looks exactly the same.
Very good.
Yeah.
So let's get back to, a little bit back to special education again. That's what we came here to talk about. What are some of the challenges? And you talked a little bit about moving money and into special education, but what are some of the challenges that you face specifically in Olathe? You talk about that with special education. We talked about finding educators.
Yeah.
What are some of the other things that?
Yeah, so I would say, without a doubt, our biggest challenge in special education is staffing special education. Right now, today, I think we have about 10 certified licensed positions for special education that are filled by long-term substitutes. We have great people who step forward to help us that way, but that's a challenge for us, and there's fewer and fewer people going into education overall, but especially special education. So the staffing part is really challenging for us right now. When we look at some of the services we provide, like OT, PT, speech, those areas, not only are we competing against other school districts, but private industry is taking a lot of those people and paying them far more money than we're able to in the school setting. And so we're challenged that way more than we ever have been.
When you talk about what you pay your teachers, is
So it's district by district. In the state of Kansas, you have a bargaining unit that represents your certified licensed staff. So in our district, it's Olathe NEA, and so that's a recognized bargaining group that our district bargains with every year, and that group is essentially the one that negotiates the details of how our staff is paid, our certified licensed staff, and then it goes out to all of our certified licensed staff for a vote on an annual basis. So that's part of it, and then the other piece is the Board of Education has to vote to approve it as well. So it's negotiated every year, but it's different by district in the state of Kansas.
You mentioned the Board of Education. What role does the Board of Education have in terms of, you know, we're talking about curriculum, we're talking about, you know, the pay of teachers and the funding for special education and where money is spent? What is their role, or is all that really done by the administrators?
Mary, would you like to step up? You know, I would say fundamentally the main role of the Board of Education is policy, governance, guidance, those typical things. However, you know, as you just mentioned, that when it comes to paying our staff, they're really also as important as our bargaining unit in terms of helping the district know where we should go. So, you know, for example, last year when we were in the negotiations process, you know, there's someone from the district that typically represents the board in those processes, at least in larger districts. But our board made it very clear to us, we want you to get our starting salary as high as we possibly can. So that was a clear message to us from our board as we negotiated. And we keep the board informed kind of during the process. You know, sometimes people see a negotiation, and in some districts it works this way for a contract every year, that you go in for a couple hours, you sit down, you negotiate back and forth. Ours goes year-round, and so, you know, it's a thing that we're really communicating with our board through the entire process, getting their feedback, their recommendations, because at the end of the day, you know, kind of from the administrative school governance side, they're the ones that have to vote on it to make sure they're comfortable with it. So I would say it's all of the above. In terms of curriculum, our board and all boards in the state of Kansas approve our curriculum and the resources that we use to teach that curriculum as well. And that's really designed that we have locally elected board members that represent a constituency within our districts, that they should be keeping those people in mind as they vote for resources, curriculum, those kinds of things.
So if they have, if they do vote on the curriculum, but they don't develop the curriculum.
They do not.
The curriculum is developed how?
So a couple of ways. So the State Department of Education, the state board, is actually the one that facilitates kind of the initial curriculum rewriting piece on an annual, or not on an annual basis. There's some they do every year, but it's a rotating basis. So then locally, we take what they've provided. Typically, most districts have a team of teachers and a team of professionals in that subject area who work within our district that can take whatever the state provides and say, okay, these pieces are great, but for our community, we know we need to add this, 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 and this. And that's what gets recommended to the Board of Education. There are times that what the state develops is so good, people will just say, okay, this looks great, let's roll this on to our board to get it approved. But there's always the opportunity for that local input on the curriculum that we put in front of our kids.
So should school board members have some education and background in education if they're going to be deciding on whether to approve or not approve a curriculum? I mean,
Well, you know, the blessing and the curse of education is everybody has some background in education, right? So that piece,
well, I don't know about that.
so that piece is there. But you know, from a high level, I think the most important thing for our board members is to be in a space where they can ask questions about what's being moved forward, and for districts to have practices in place that allow our board members that opportunity. I will say in our district, and certainly every district in Johns County, that's the expectation, that there's an opportunity for board members to see what's happening, to review documents, to ask questions. And I really think that's a really important part of that process.
How do we, as citizens and voters, know that the education that's being provided for each and every individual child in our schools, in our districts, is equitable and fair and they're getting everything that they need. How do we know that? I mean, they go to school, they close the door, they're in there. How do I as a parent know that my child is getting the best and everything that they need? And they're getting the same thing that Johnny sitting over here and Susie sitting over here is getting.
Yeah. Well, I would first say that we don't want them to get the same thing that Johnny and Susie are getting necessarily. We need to have that foundation that all kids are getting. But the reality is, it's such an opportunity to work with kids, but they're all different, right? And so we need to be in a place where we know that everybody's getting at least this, but we are very happy to do extra work for Johnny or extra work for Susie to make sure they get what they need. I would say the number one thing is go to our schools. There is so much misinformation in the world about what's happening in public schools today. The best antecedent for that is to go out and get in schools so people can see for themselves, here's what's happening, here's what it looks like, and here's what I see. That's been a focus for our district for the last couple of years, is really getting the community into our schools. Because you all know there's some, probably shouldn't use this word, but there's some ridiculous things that have been shared in the world, like us having litter boxes in our schools. Like, we may have litter boxes in our schools, but it's probably for the bunnies and the naturalist program, that kind of thing. So I would say that really it's about being present. It's about asking questions. We have amazing staffs in our school districts in Johnson County. Our teachers will take phone calls and say, here's what I'm doing. I mean, we want to partner with our communities. We want to partner with our parents. And I would say that's the best way. And part of that is because every kiddo is different. The other piece is, as parents, make sure your kids are growing. And when you look at assessment data from year to year, as teachers, does it look like my students made progress from last year to this year? And if not, what are we doing about that? Those kinds of things.
So are your schools open and are they welcoming to parents who want to come in and visit?
Yes.
Great,
Yes.
great.
Yes.
And so, one more question here along those lines. How can we as citizens, voters, parents, grandparents, what is it that we can do to better support public education in our district? What can we do? What do we need to be doing?
I so appreciate you asking that question. Thank you. So, we in the state of Kansas, our certified licensed staff had the opportunity last fall, whole state of Kansas, all certified licensed staff to take, it's called the EPIC survey. It's about educator retention and engagement for educators in the state of Kansas. The lowest ranked item on the entire survey was public perception of the teaching profession. 14% of the teachers in Kansas feel supported by public. And it's not better in Johnson County. Our district number is like 13%. I mean, it's really, really challenging. So, we're doing a district tour right now at the Board of Education, myself, other senior leaders, and members of our Olathe NEA union group. We're going around and visiting all of our schools. That one of the things that people can do is share the good news of public schools and the things that are happening within our districts. People expect the Olathe Public Schools to share the good things about Olathe Public Schools, or Shawnee Mission to share the good things about Shawnee Mission Schools. But the reality is we need partners in education to help highlight the good things that our staff is doing across all of our schools each and every day. I mean, as I said, people ask me all the time, what keeps you worried at night? Like, what keeps you awake at night? That's it. If our teachers don't feel loved and supported and held in a high level of esteem by our communities, we're in really trouble. We're in a lot of trouble.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's, a national teacher shortage.
That's right.
too, So it is important. I wondered if we had some questions. Okay, great. Oh, boy, we have a lot of questions.
Oh, here we go. All right. Hopefully they're not all about school funding. I gave you about everything I need on that. That's okay.
Wow, some of these. You know which ones are gonna get read, right? The guys with the best penmanship. I don't know if you answered this question. We did talk about the Education Foundation, but someone wants to know how much money does the Olathe district receive from the Education Foundation?
Yeah, I can't give you the exact number. What I can tell you is there's a path through. So like our teachers will write a grant to our foundation, maybe for something innovative in their classrooms. if it costs $2,500 or something like that, our district purchasing department's responsible for getting those things, and then the foundation pays them. But that's generally the way the pass-through works.
Someone wants to know that you mentioned 18 to 21-year-olds. I think when we were talking about special education, a program for them. This one person wants to know, can you explain a little bit more about what that program is and what that looks like?
Sure. So 18 to 21 is a special education program that students who have eligibility to participate in some additional schooling for another 3 years after graduation. It's part of the federal IDEA, so all school districts offer it. Typically for us, what that looks like is life and job coaching. So in our district right now, we are actually building a new CTE center, but part of it's going to be a training site for 18 to 21 programs. And so ours will be almost like a grocery store, convenience store, where students that are there have the opportunity to learn some work and job skills, but they also have the opportunity to work with money and things like that. That program relies heavily on job coaches, where the job coach goes with the student who's 18 to 21 out into the community and works a job. They do it alongside each other to hopefully help those students once they graduate from that programming at 21 to be more sufficient when they go to adulthood.
Is that a program that just continues on from like high school and they just move in? Or can a student get into that program once they've left the Olathe School District?
Yeah, great question. No. So it's a continuum of service that happens. The students who are in those programs still graduate with all their classmates when they, get to their senior year, at the end of their senior year, but then they stay for those additional years. Yep.
And I think you touched on this a little bit, but we can go back to it. So this person wants to know, do you get the funds for a special education student the year that they first enroll, or is there a year's lapse before those funds kick in?
Great question. Actually, we get those funds the year that they enroll. And in Kansas, there's a one count day for your general fund. That's September 20th every year. That's where they put the pin in and say, here's your enrollment for the year. But actually in special education, there's a count September and a count in January as well, in case students with special needs would move in or be identified during the course of the year.
Is English as a second language considered special education?
It's not.
Okay. How does that complicate things for a district when you need to provide those services? As we know that, especially Spanish learners, Spanish-speaking students, those numbers are increasing greatly throughout Kansas and Missouri, but really in Kansas.
Excuse me.
So how does that complicate issues for you?
I would say, I don't know if complicate is the right word, but it really slows the process to identify for special education, because one of the things that we never want to do is identify a student for special education when actually maybe their challenge is access to language in terms of English. And so for us, it's about getting the right people around the table at those IEP meetings and those conversations when it comes forward for evaluation. So for example, if we have a student who their native language is Spanish, and a team is considering them for a special education evaluation, we always have one of in our district, we call ELL, our English language learner professionals, that's part of that conversation also, to make sure that there's not a step that moves forward with special education when really what we're looking at is access to English language, and that's really the profound need at the time.
This question, I wasn't going to ask it, but somebody wants to know, so it's something to get there. They want to know, how does the superintendent feel about the voucher system? And the one that we're talking about, what's been proposed by the legislature.
Yeah, simply for me, and I would say this has been one of our longstanding board things too, is public funds for public schools. And that's our superintendent.
And I just want to give you just one last, our time is running up, but I just want to give you one last thing to talk a little bit, since you just said that. Tell us from your perspective, how important and why is public education one of the most important public goods that we have in this country? Tell us.
Well, I could talk about this for another hour. So, one of the blessings I've had in my life is being a superintendent is I've been in schools in New York City, I've been in schools in Oklahoma, I've been in schools in Florida, I've been in schools in California, I've been in schools all over this country. The consistent thing from school to school is we have educators who want to help kids be better, period. It doesn't matter where they are, they want them to learn, they want them to be successful in life, and that's really amazing because, in my opinion, public education is the great equalizer in the United States of America. If we didn't have that, we would be like other countries around the world where kids didn't have to guarantee to a free, appropriate public education, where when they're 8 or 9 or 10, they say, you go this way, you go this way. And, you know, I think about this all the time because props to the Shawnee Mission School District, but if you went back and talked to any of my teachers in elementary school, middle school, high school, they'd all say Brent was a really nice guy. They would be stunned that I'm sitting in front of you as a superintendent. It's the truth, they would. And I've had those interactions with several of them since I've been the superintendent. How did that happen? But it happened because of access and opportunity to public schools in the United States. It did. I was the first person in my family to go to college, and you know, my parents just knew I needed to go. They didn't have any idea what I needed to do. But the reality is none of that would have been possible without a guaranteed public education for me. And there are stories after stories like that across the United States of America. That if we didn't guarantee that for our kids, it wouldn't happen. I mean, it really is something so special about it. And, you know, I'm bothered all the time when I see the rhetoric around the failure of public schools and the challenge of public schools. Can we always get better? Absolutely. Can we always meet individual needs of every kid better? Absolutely. But it's such a precious thing we have that we can't let go to the wayside in this country.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yeager and Ms. Williams. I have some announcements from the teams. From the voter information team, be sure to attend and encourage your friends and family to attend the upcoming meet and greets. They will be October 7th at the Olathe Indian Creek Library and also October 17th at Village Presbyterian Church. Please check the website for information regarding the candidates for office and the districts that will be represented at those meetings. Also from the voter information team, we have walk cards in the back for you to drop at your neighbors and friends to encourage voting. Patty's holding them up. Be sure to notice the swag that was the Shawnee Mission West American Government class project for them to learn how to connect to youth. The league was their quote client, and their work is in the back. Also, be sure to notice that there are 2024 voter guides there, that when I learned about that, I was like, oh my gosh, I need one of those. So in addition, 6 Degrees of Activism asked us to promote an upcoming event. There will be a viewing of the documentary Backpack Full of Cash, narrated by Matt Damon. This 96-minute documentary explores the growing privatization of public schools and the resulting impact on America's most vulnerable children. This event will be tomorrow night at 6 p.m. at the Village Presbyterian Church on Antioch. And the address is 14895 Antioch Road in Overland Park. One more thing, the holiday social will be on December 4th, 2024 at the Meadowbrook Park Clubhouse. Please RSVP on our website, but you must be logged in to do so. Remember that. Or you can sign up at the membership table, or you can email membership@lwvjoco.org. You can volunteer to help us have a warm and welcoming event. Visit the membership table on your way out. In conclusion, our next meeting will be November 2nd, and it's entitled Expanding Medicaid in Kansas. Be watching for the next voter newsletter to see who will be participating in the panel. Thank you all for sharing your Saturday morning with us. We'll see you soon. Oh, Harry has one more thing.
All right, I just thought this should be announced. We heard from Marie, from the voter information team, and I think a lot of the people that are in here, because I know you were involved with it, they mailed out over 2,000 postcards to voters who had voted maybe a few years ago and hadn't voted since. And people decorated these little postcard things on both sides, kind of saying, hey, go vote, check it out. That's amazing that we sent it that many out, and I thank very much. Everybody have a great day.